Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm your host, Alec MacDonald. Taiwan is entering an unprecedented moment in its democratic history as over 24 opposition lawmakers are facing recall efforts. Last year, widespread public frustration over the main opposition party, the Kuomintang or KMT, led to a wave of citizen-led recall petitions. While attempts to recall KMT lawmakers, generally dubbed part of the Blue Camp, have gone forward, attempts to recall politicians from the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, or Green Camp have fallen flat. If enough KMT lawmakers are recalled, the DPP could flip the legislature if it won the subsequent by-elections. Today, to discuss this historical recall election and get an inside look at Taiwan's domestic politics, we are joined by Courtney Donovan Smith, a political analyst in Taichung, Taiwan. Courtney Donovan Smith, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
Donovan, so these recall efforts actually take quite a few number of steps. For those unfamiliar, can you take us through the recall process?
What a recall campaign has to do in stage one is get 1% of the electorate to fill in their details and sign. This determines whether or not they're actually serious. Once those are vetted and they are approved to move on to stage two. Stage two, then you need to get 10% of the electorate, which is a higher bar. Now, if, and this has happened in 7 cases so far, you've got the campaigns submitted enough above the minimum threshold, but because of very strict rules about the numbers that were rejected were brought down below the threshold. However, by law, there's a 10-day grace period for those campaigns to make up for those disqualified entries and bring it back up above the threshold. If these are approved, then you move on to the third stage, which is the actual recall itself. Now, once or if a politician is successfully recalled, they cannot stand in the by-election. If the recall fails, then that politician is safe for the remainder of their term from any further recall attempts against them. So successful recalls then move on to a by-election, where in this case, because they're all KMT lawmakers, the KMT would need to bring in new candidates, and the DPP would bring in their candidates and maybe third parties as well to run in that seat.
Politically, there were a lot of twists and turns throughout these past few months. What was the biggest surprise to you?
Well, in a sense, it's surprising that it happened, although when you consider political parties that their ultimate aim is, of course, power, and they'll use whatever laws they can to get leverage. So at some point or another, someone was going to look at the relatively low thresholds for recall and say that, we could use this strategically in a big way. So I guess ultimately it's not a surprise, but I'll admit myself, and I'm sure many others, were kind of caught off guard. But I think the biggest surprise once the recalls started is the gap between the momentum and enthusiasm between the civil society groups that could be termed, say, on the pan-green side, and the KMT-led recalls against DPP lawmakers. There's been quite a disparity between the two in enthusiasm, motivation, organization, but also to a certain degree resources.
So as part of that, the campaigns against the DPP lawmakers really all fell flat, while the campaigns against the KMT lawmakers, well, there's now over 24 facing recalls. So what was the difference between these two movements?
The civil society groups that targeted the KMT lawmakers kind of had an advantage in that they came out of the Bluebird movement, which originated last May to protest against the KMT TPP-led legislature and a lot of the things that they were trying to pass at the time. So that gave them a little bit of a taste of organization, motivating, and getting people out, which they did for quite a period there. So they had some momentum behind them already. plus emotional and personal ties that bond a movement together. So they had these things going for them. It also helped on their side that the UMC founder Robert Zhao also came in and it started supporting them as well. So, they came into this better prepared, better resourced, and better organized. Now, the KMT side should have been able to come into this with better organization because they did actually explicitly, as a party, come out to try and support their groups. But they were trying to organize, they do have a very powerful and efficient party organization, but not for this. This is not something they have experience with. So they were trying to bring together motivated volunteers and staffers to try and get these things off the ground very quickly, whereas the Bluebird movement had been going for a while already. And the KMT has a lot of financial issues, so they have far less resources. And so they came in without the momentum, without the motivation, and were disorganized and underfunded right from the get-go.
So, looking forward, because of these campaigns, do you think that there's anything in Taiwan's political landscape that might change?
Well, yes, I believe that two possible things are going to happen out of this, particularly if a lot of the recalls are successful. And the first is that lawmakers and other politicians who are eligible to be recalled are going to start looking over their shoulder. And this is going to make them very nervous going forward because, the thresholds are relatively low. And again, if there's quite a few that are successful, a lot of politicians might become very, very cautious going forward about the things that they say and do. It also may trigger a discussion on whether or not the thresholds are indeed too low. They used to be very high.
I want to talk a little bit about the Taiwan People's Party, or TPP, for a moment. Previously, they were this centrist party that was supposed to be between the KMT and the DPP. However, they have really moved over to the pan-blue camp with the KMT. What do you make of them looking forward?
Well, they've moved, as you said, into the pan-blue camp. They're at least as much pan-blue as when the term was coined back in 2000, 2001, with the People's First Party and New Party playing a very similar role allied with the KMT. And that's when they came up with the term pan-blue to describe all of them as a group. Now, for some time, actually, myself and many other analysts have noted that they have been effectively a pan-blue party for some time. And I've been speculating this for years, but I haven't, had a formal confirmation on this. But it looks like strategically what they're looking at is that long-term, the KMT support for the One China principle is untenable when you look at what percentage of the population supports Taiwan's sovereignty, fears the People's Republic, identify themselves as Taiwanese. So they are eyeing a potential space there that if the voting public turns more against the KMT's One China principle policies, which states that Taiwan is a province of China, although of course there's a lot of debate within the party about when or under what terms Taiwan would be annexed into China. That basic philosophy is broadly quite unpopular, and so the TPP seems to be hoping to maybe move into that space without being so explicitly one China, and that they may be able to supplant the KMT as the opposition to the DPP. Now, whether they can actually do that is definitely an open question. The KMT has over 100 years of experience. They have a lot of very qualified, very successful, very smart people in the party and institutional knowledge that really makes them a very strong local presence that really do make them hard to replace. But that may not stop the TPP from trying, and over time, perhaps they'll succeed, or they'll go the way of the People's First Party before them.
But right now, the TPP, the Taiwan People's Party, hold the 8 critical seats that break the tie in the legislative makeup. So if the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, were to gain enough seats through this recall effort, would the Taiwan People's Party begin to lose their relevancy?
If the DPP gets an outright majority in the legislature, that would mean that both the KMT and the TPP would lose a lot of influence. Then it would go back to like it was during the Tsai administration, and the DPP could use their legislative majority to accomplish their goals. A more interesting scenario would be if the DPP picks up a few seats, but not enough to get the majority, and they hold a plurality like the KMT does now. In theory, the TPP could switch to the DPP side, but I find that unlikely as things stand right now. I think that they will stand by the KMT as long as the two of them can form a majority.
What about the Kuomintang? Because regardless of the outcome of these recall efforts, they are facing chair elections this September. So what do you make about their future?
That's a very interesting question, because I do think that a lot will depend on the results of the recall votes. We have a KMT chair race coming up at the end of very late in September, with the new chair set to take office early in October. Now, there's been a lot of speculation around Taichung Mayor Liu Xiaoyan running. There's already 3 other candidates in the race, but they're all long shots. Eric Zhu has done quite a bit, the current chair, to reform the party, to improve their finances, and bring in younger people within the party, and to overall strengthen the party and streamline it going forward. And he's had a fair bit of success with this. However, along the way, he's also ruffled some feathers and made some enemies. So he's potentially vulnerable. Now, if the recall campaigns are very successful against KMT lawmakers, that's going to hurt him pretty badly. However, Liu Xiaoyan has not actually formally announced what she's going to do. There are various reports coming out of people from within her camp saying different things, that she might try and bring in someone. She might run. If she did run and win, she would still have a little over 1 year term of her term left as Taichung mayor. And to run a Taipei-based party from Taichung while taking care of all the duties that are required to run the second largest city in the country, that's tough. Worse, for her strategically, is that she's also likely to be the KMT presidential candidate in 2028. So she needs to do a good job and leave her job as Taichung mayor on a high note. If she's too distracted by running the party, if, by the way, Eric Chu does do a good job at fighting off these recalls, that will put him in a much stronger position to defend and try and run for re-election. If he goes down badly, he may resign to take responsibility or serve out his term and not run again. So there are really a lot of questions around this race, and I think it's going to be a very fascinating race to watch.
Courtney, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
It's great to be on the show for the first time.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from Taiwan Plus News, you can visit us on taiwanplus.com or follow us on social media. Until next time.